we continue the introductions of the Holy Quran by Abdullah Yusuf Ali with Introduction to Surah 21, Al-Anbiya. The last surah deals with the individual story, spiritual, of Moses and Aaron, and contrast it with the growth of evil in individuals like the Pharaoh and the Semari, and ended with a warning against evil and an exhortation to the purification of the soul with prayer and praise. This surah begins with external obstacles placed by evil against such purification and gives the assurance of Allah's power to defend men, illustrating this with reference to Abraham's fight against idolatry, Lot's fight against injustice and failure to proclaim Allah's glory by making full use of a man's God-given faculties and powers, that of Job against impatience and want of self-confidence, that of Ismail, Idris, and Dhul-Kifl against want of steady perseverance, that of Da al-Nun against hasty anger, and that of Zechariah against spiritual insulation, and that of Mary against the lusts of this world. In each allusion, there is a special point about the soul's purification. The common point is that the prophets were not, as the vulgar suppose, just irresistible men. They had to win their ground inch by inch against all kinds of resistance from evil. The chronology of this surah has no significance. It probably dates from the middle of the Meccan period of inspiration. Summary 1 through 29. Man treats, as he has always treated, the serious things of life with jest or contempt. But the judgment must come, and truth must triumph. 30 to 50. Unity of design and certainty of Allah's promise, Allah's protection and mercy, and His justice. 51 to 93. How Abraham triumphed over idols, as did others among Allah's chosen ones, over various forms of evil. 94 to 112. Work righteousness while it is yet time, for the judgment will come, and only the righteous will inherit. And so after the chapter of the prophets, we have a chapter of the pilgrimage. Introduction to Surah 22, Al-Hajj. We have now come to a new series of 4 Suwar dealing with the environments and methods contributing to our spiritual progress, as the last 5 Suwar dealt with the messengers who came in various ways to proclaim the truth and conquer evil. The subject matter of this particular surah is concerned with the spiritual implications of the sacred house, the pilgrimage, the sacrifice, striving and fighting in defense of truth when attacked, and other acts that make for unselfishness and uproot falsehood. On the chronology of this surah, opinion is divided. Some parts were probably revealed in the latter Meccan period, and some in Medina, but the chronological question has no significance here. Well, none that he knows. Summary. 1 to 25. Importance of the spiritual future and need of firmness in faith, help for truth, and punishment for evil. 26 through 48. Purity, prayer, humility, and faith are implied in the pilgrimage. In solemn sacrifice, we express our gratitude and reverence to Allah and our desire to share food with our poorer brethren. Striving and fighting in defense of truth when attacked are necessary as tests of self-sacrifice. Did I say 26 through 48 for purity, for humility? 49 to 78. The promptings of evil may hinder the work of Allah's prophet, but that work must triumph, and the mercy and truth of Allah must be established. Therefore, serve Allah humbly, and He will protect and help you. And after the chapter, the pilgrimage, we come upon the introduction to Surah 23, Al-Mu'minun. This surah deals with the virtues which are the seedbed of faith, especially in an environment in which truth is denied and its votaries insulted and persecuted. But truth is one and must prevail. Those who do wrong will be filled with vain regrets when it is too late for repentance. It belongs to the late Meccan period. Summary, 1 through 50. Faith, coupled with humility and prayer, charity, abstinence from vanity, and from indulgence in appetites, and strict probity, must lead to final success, even though people mock and accuse the righteous of false motives, as did the contemporaries of Noah, of Moses, and of Jesus. 51 to 92. The prophets of Allah and the righteous form one brotherhood, but those who make schisms and refuse to believe have ample evidence pointing to truth and the goodness and greatness of Allah. 93 to 118. Evil must be repelled by goodness and faith in Allah, for the future life is sure, and those who disbelieve will wish for another chance when it is too late. And after the believers, we arrive at the introduction, to Surah 24, Al-Nur. The environmental and social influences which most frequently wreck our spiritual ideals have to do with sex and especially with its misuse, whether in the form of unregulated behaviors or false charges or scandals, or a breach of the refined conventions of personal or domestic privacy. Our complete conquest of all pitfalls in such matters enables us to rise to the higher regions of light and of God-created nature. This subject continues in the next chapter. So remember how I mentioned material culture and psychology, so that definitely plays a role, and we need to understand religion beyond those terms. So as the reprobation of false slanders about women, like verse 11 through 20 relates, it can be applied to men too, of course, is connected with an incident that happened to Aisha in Al-Hijrah 5 and 6, or 5 to 6, that fixes the chronological place of this Medina Surah. (35 to 57) is the summary. Sex offenses should be severely punished, but the strictest evidence should be required, and false slanders are also worthy of punishment. Light talk about women is republicated. 27 through 34, privacy should be respected, and the utmost decorum should be observed in dress and manners. (35 to 57), the parable of light and darkness, order and obedience in nature, point to the spiritual duty of man. 58 through 64, domestic manners and manners in public are of collective life that all contribute to the highest values and are in part of our spiritual duties leading up to a law. And so instead of 11 through 20, it should be 1 through 20. And okay. Hold on a sec. And 21 through 37 talks about preparing such. God is the light, 35 to 57. Yeah, that part's right. And so I don't know why that's not complete, but after the light, we have the criterion. Introduction to Surah 25, Al-Furqan. This surah further develops the contrast between light and darkness as symbolical of knowledge and ignorance, righteousness and sin, spiritual progress and degradation. It closes with a definition of the deeds by which the righteous are known in the environment of this world. It is mainly an early Meccan surah, but its date has no significance. You know, that he can see. I'm going to try not to say that next time it says that, because how am I going to alter that? Okay, summary of 1 through 20. Allah's highest gift to man is that he has furnished a criterion for judgment between right and wrong in his revelation, which teaches us the true significance of our eternal future. 21 through 44. Those who do not use that criterion will be full of woe when the judgment comes, for Allah gave full warning at all times. 45 to 77. In the contrast of shade and sun, night and day, death and life, and the whole ordering of Allah's creation, men may learn of Allah most gracious, and the virtues of the righteous respond to Allah's care for them. And after the criterion, we arrive at the chapter called the Poets. And in the Arabic way of speaking, the Quran's not poetry or prose. I guess in some languages that's how people would think of it, but the Arabic term implies that things are there for style that aren't necessary, that don't do anything to the meaning. And there isn't any example of the Quran doing this. Meaning and effect are just as one. This surah begins a new series of 4 Suwar, 26 through 29, which illustrate the contrast between the spirit of prophecy and spiritual light, and the reactions to it in the communities among whom it appeared, by going back to old prophets and the stories of the past as explained in the introduction to Surah 17. In this particular surah, we have the story of Moses in his fight with Pharaoh and of Pharaoh's discomfiture. Other prophets mentioned are Abraham, Noah, Hud, Saleh, Lut, Shu'aib. The lesson is drawn that the Quran is a continuation and fulfillment of previous revelations and is pure truth, unlike poetry of vain poets. Yeah, just don't have style or art for art's sake. Do something with your art, man. Chronologically, the surah belongs in the middle Meccan period, when the contact of the light of prophecy with the milieu of Mecca was testing the Meccans in their most arrogant mood. Summary of 1 through 69. The conflict of unbelief and truth is vain. So was the conflict of Pharaoh with Moses. Pharaoh's magicians, evil, not just people are changing consciousness or something, but sahir, what's the noun form of what we're talking about here? Adverb, that's what I'm thinking of. But anyways, basically jinn magic. The word being rendered as magic here is a specific type where you involve, you're playing with the heat, you're using deceit, you're, by the heat, the jinn are being allowed to take place, basically, is Pharaoh's magicians bowed to the truth, and Pharaoh and his hosts were drowned. Nor did Abraham's, 70 through 122, nor did Abraham's people gain anything by their resisting of the truth he preached, and Noah's people perished by their unbelief. 123 to 159, Hud warned his people against reliance on their material strength, and Saleh against sacrilege, but in both cases, the evil ones were brought low. 160 to 191, Lut had to deal with unspeakable crimes and Shu'aib against dishonest dealings and mischief. Their teaching was rejected, but the rejectors were wiped out. 192 to 227. So, when the spirit of prophecy came to Mecca, it was resisted by the votaries of evil. But truth is not like vain poetry, must triumph at last. And you've already seen that 26 or 28 are, the Ka scene series, but so then we have the introduction to Surah 27, Al-Naml. This surah is cognate and subject to the one preaching it, and the two following it. Its chronological place is also in the same group of 4 in the middle Meccan period. Here, there is much mystic symbolism. Wonders in the physical world are types of greater wonders in the spiritual world. The fire, the white hand, and the rod. In the story of Moses, the speech of birds, the crowds of jinn and men, humans, remember gender neutral here, pitted against a humble ant, and the hoopoe, and the queen of Sheba in Solomon's story, the defeat of the plot of the 9 wicked men in the story of Saleh, and the crime of sin with open eyes in the story of Lut, lead up to the lessons of true and false worship, and the miracles of Allah's grace and revelation. Summary of 1 through 14. Wonderful in revelation, like the fire which Moses saw, which was a glimpse of Allah's glory, and his miracles, which searched out those who refused faith in spite of the light they had received. 15 through 44. Solomon knew the speech of birds and had a host of jinn and men. Yet the wise ant had ample defense against them. The hoopoe, who was absent at his muster, was yet serving him. The queen of Sheba had a kingdom, but it submitted with conviction to the wisdom of Solomon and the kingdom of Allah. 45 through 58. Fools ascribe ill luck to godliness, as in Saleh's story, or fall into lusts with their eyes open, as in Lut's story. You know, the people surrounding Lut. But their plots and their rage will be foiled by God. 59 through 93. God's glory and goodness are supreme over all creation. Unfaith will yield to faith in the final adjustment of values. So follow revelation, serve Allah, and trust in Him. You know, Allah is the singular and definitive of God. So after the chapter of the ant, we arrive at the introduction to Surah 28. Al-Qasas. This surah continues the subject of revelation and its reception by those to whom it is sent, but it emphasizes new points, how the recipients of inspiration are prepared for his high destiny, even in the growth of his ordinary life, and how the rejection of Allah's message by groups of men or by individuals is caused by overweening arrogance or avarice. The plight of those who reject the truth is contrasted with the reward of the righteous. With the possible exception of a few verses, it belongs to the late Meccan period, just preceding the Hijra. Summary of 1 through 42. Pharaoh was arrogant and unjust. The law's plan was to strengthen the weak. In infancy, Moses was prepared for his mission. In youth, he trusted in the Lord and was guided. In his exile, he found hope and love. And when he was called, he was supported by God. 43 through 60. So was the Holy Prophet Muhammad, fed spiritually by Allah's grace, and his revelation was recognized by those who knew the earlier revelation. It came to an old and sacred center to warn those seduced by this world's life. 61 to 75. The future is with those who repent, have faith, and do good, for all mercy and truth are with Allah. 76 through 88. But men puffed up with wealth, like Qarun, will come to an evil end, while the lowly and the righteous will attain God's mercy. And after the narration, we come to the introduction to Surah 29, Al-Ankabut. This surah is the last of the series begun with Surah 17, in which the growth of the spiritual man as an individual is considered, especially illustrated by the way in which the great prophets were prepared for their work and received their mission, and the nature of revelation in relation to the environments in which it was promulgated. It also closes the sub-series beginning with Surah 26, which is concerned with the spiritual light and the reactions to it at certain points of spiritual history. The last surah closed with a reference to the doctrine of the Ma'ad, our final return of man to Allah. This theme is further developed here, and as it is continued in the subsequent 3 Suwar, all bearing the abbreviated letters Aleph Lam Mim. It forms a connecting link between the present series and those three Suwar. In particular emphasis is laid here on the necessity of linking actual conduct with the reception of Allah's revelation, and reference is again made to the stories of Noah, Abraham, and Lot among the peoples, among the prophets, and the stories of Madian, Ad, Thamud, and Pharaoh among the rejectors of Allah's message. This world's life is contrasted with the real life of the hereafter. Chronologically, the main surah belongs to the late Middle Meccan period, but the chronology has no known significance except as showing how clearly the vision of the future was revealed long before the Hijrah to the struggling brotherhood of Islam. Summary of 1 to 27. Belief is tested by trial in life and practical conduct. Though Noah lived 950 years, his people refused faith, and Abraham's generation threatened to burn Abraham. Did I say 1 to 27? 28 through 44. Lot's people not only rejected Allah's message, but publicly defied him in sin. The Ad and the Thamud had intelligence but misused it, and Qarun, Pharaoh, and Haman perished for their overweening arrogance. They found their worldly power as frail as a spider's web. 29. Oh, I said 28 through 44. 45 to 69. The Quran as a revelation stands on its own merits and is a sign. It teaches the distinction between right and wrong and shows the importance and excellence of the hereafter. And after the spider, we arrive at the Romans, the Byzantians. Introduction to Surah 30. Al-Rum. This surah, as remarked in the introduction to the last surah, deals with the question of Ma'ad, or the final end of things, from various points of view. In the last surah, we saw that revelation was linked up with life and conduct, and time, looking backwards and forwards, figured forth the frailty of this life. In this surah, the time theme and its mystery are brought into relation with human history in the foreground and the evolution of the world in all its aspects. In that background, the corruption introduced by man is cleared away by Allah, whose universal plan points to us to the hereafter. We shall see that the next two Suratain 31 and 32 present the theme in other aspects. All four are introduced with the abbreviated letters Aleph Lam Mim, which, without being dogmatic, I have suggested as symbolical of the past, present, and future. A series of these such things could be true. The chronology of this surah is significant. It was revealed about the 7th or 6th year before the Hijrah, responding to 615 to 616 of the Common Era, when the tide of Persian conquest over the Roman Empire was running strong, as explained in Appendix 8. The Christian Empire of Rome had lost Jerusalem to the Persians, and Christianity had been humbled in that dust. At that time, it seemed outside the bounds of human possibility, even to one intimately acquainted with the inner resources and conditions of the Persian and Roman armies and empires, that the tables would be turned and the position reversed within the space of 8 or 9 years. The pro-Persian Quraysh rejoiced exceedingly and redoubled their taunts and persecution against the Holy Prophet, whose message was a renewal of the message of Christ preached in Jerusalem. Then was this passage, 1 through 6, revealed, clearly foreshadowing the final defeat of Persia, 14 through 16. From Appendix 8. As a prelude to the destruction of the Persian Empire, there is no doubt about the prophecy and its fulfillment. For the exulting of Mecca laid a heavy wager against the fulfillment of the prophecy with Abu Bakr, and they lost it on its fulfillment. But the rise and fall even of such mighty empires as the Persian and Roman empires were but small events on the checkerboard of time compared to a mightier movement that was taking birth in the promulgation of Islam in the 7th or 6th year before the Hijrah, and for a year or two after the Hijrah, Islam was struggling in the world like the still small voice in the conscience of humanity. It was scarcely heeded, and when it sought to insist upon its divine claim, it was insulted, assaulted, persecuted, boycotted, and, as it seemed, suppressed. The agony of Ta'if 2 years before the Hijrah and the murder plot on the eve of the Hijrah were yet to come. But the purpose of Allah is not to be thwarted. Badr, 2 al-Hijrah, or 624 of the Common Era, rightly called the critical day of decision, began to redress the balance of outward events in the early international age of Islam. In the same year in which Isas, Appendix 8:16, began to redress the balance of outward events in the Perso-Roman relations, mightier events were yet to come. A new inner world was being created through Islam. The spiritual revolution was an infinitely greater moment in world history. The toppling down of priestcraft and false worship, the restoration of simplicity in faith and life, the rehabilitation of this life as the first step to the understanding of the hereafter, the displacement of superstition and hair-splitting theology by a spirit of rational inquiry and knowledge, and the recognition of the divine as covering not merely an isolated thing called religion. I mean, religion and church is quite the same thing, right? But the whole way of life, thought and feeling. Well, if it's a relationship between God and with God and created, a regulating relationship, it could definitely include everything. This was and is this true message of Islam and its message and its mission, its struggle, its fight, physical and otherwise, continues, but is not without effect, as may be seen in the march of centuries in world history. Summary of 1 through 19. The ebb and flow of worldly power, as symbolized in the conflict of Persian and Roman empires, or but outward events. The deeper meaning is in the working of Allah's universe, how good and evil reach their final end. 20 through 40. The changes and changing variety of Allah in Allah's creation, physical, moral, and spiritual, pinpoint to unity in nature and religion. Man should not break away from that unity, but glorify him, the one, for there is none like unto him. 41 through 60. The hands of men have wrought corruption and mischief, but Allah purifies the moral world as He does the world of physical nature, strengthening the weak and pulling down the mighty in due season. Wait therefore in patience and in constancy, and be not depressed. And so we move on, I guess, to share what some would consider the most important, well, certainly for some, verse 21 and 30 would be of the most important. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So, not some Disney sort of or fantasy world idea of soulmates, but the divine purpose of partnership there. So God putting the opportunity for love there. And فَاقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And as said, the original religion, the eternal religion, which we are all upon, regardless of what you call it, so that's what we're supposed to stay upon. And sorry about the sounds from the turtle and all that, but Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.